The distress beacon's shrill wail pierced through Commander Jake Morrison's helmet as his escape pod hurtled through the violet atmosphere. Through the cracked viewport, he caught glimpses of an alien landscape rushing up to meet him. Crystalline forests that sparkled like frozen lightning, rivers of what appeared to be liquid silver, and cities that defied geometric logic with their spiral towers reaching impossibly high into the lavender sky. The pod's emergency system screamed warnings in a dozen different languages as Jake fought with the manual controls. His ship, the exploratory vessel Pioneer's Dream, was nothing more than scattered debris somewhere in the upper atmosphere, victim to an unexpected gravitational anomaly that had torn it apart like tissue paper. Of the 12-person crew, Jake had no idea if anyone else had made it to the escape pods in time. The impact came hard and fast. The pod carved a smoking furrow through what looked like a field of bioluminescent grass before coming to rest against a cluster of singing trees. He could hear their haunting melodies even through the pod's hull. Jake's head rang from the collision, and he tasted copper in his mouth. But he was alive. He ran through the emergency checklist with practiced efficiency, his military training taking over. Atmosphere, breathable, though with a higher oxygen content than Earth. Gravity, roughly 0.8 Earth standard. Temperature, a comfortable 72 degrees Fahrenheit. No immediate threats detected. Jake popped the hatch and emerged into an alien world that took his breath away. The sky above was a canvas of purple and pink, with 3 moons visible even in daylight. The grass beneath his feet glowed with a soft blue radiance, and the air smelled of cinnamon and ozone. In the distance, one of those impossible cities rose like a fever dream of architecture, its buildings seeming to flow and merge into each other like frozen water. He activated his emergency beacon and tried his comm unit. Nothing but static. The gravitational anomaly must have fried most of his electronics. His universal translator still functioned, a small miracle, but without communications he was effectively stranded. Jake had barely taken 10 steps from the pod when he heard them coming. The sound was like nothing he'd ever heard, a harmonic humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then they emerged from the singing forest. They were humanoid, but that's where the similarities ended. These beings stood 7 feet tall, with skin that shifted color like oil on water. Their faces were angular and beautiful in an alien way, with large eyes that held too many colors to name. They wore form-fitting suits that seemed to be made of living light, and each carried what was unmistakably a weapon, elegant devices that hummed with barely contained energy. All of them were female. Jake raised his hands slowly, the universal gesture of peace. "I come in peace," he said, letting his translator do its work. "My ship was destroyed. I'm stranded." The beings exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. One of them, apparently the leader, stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was like music, but there was steel beneath the melody. "Male," she said, the word dripping with a mixture of surprise and something else. "Disgust? Fear? You should not be here. You cannot be here." "I didn't mean to," Jake began, but she cut him off with a gesture. "The concordance forbids it. No males may set foot on Lysithea." She raised her weapon, and Jake's heart hammered in his chest. "The penalty is death." "Wait!" Jake took a step back. "I don't understand. My ship was destroyed. I had no choice where I landed. Please, I just need to repair my communications and—" Silence. Another of the beings spoke, this one with silver patterns flowing across her skin. "Commander Zara, perhaps we should consult the council. This is unprecedented." The one called Zara considered this, her weapon never wavering from Jake. "The law is clear, Lyra. The law was written for our own males before the purge," Lyra countered. "This is an alien. The circumstances are different." Jake watched the exchange, his mind racing. An all-female society? A purge? What had happened here? After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Zara lowered her weapon slightly. "You will come with us. The council will decide your fate. Any attempt to escape or resist will result in immediate termination. Do you understand?" Jake nodded. "I understand." They bound his hands with restraints that felt like cool silk but were stronger than steel. As they marched him toward the city, Jake caught glimpses of their society. Vehicles that floated on cushions of light glided past. Buildings that seemed to grow from the ground itself, their walls breathing like living things. And everywhere only women, tall, short, young, old, all with that same shifting skin and two bright eyes. The looks they gave him ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Some shrank away as if he carried a plague. Others watched with the intensity of scientists studying a particularly interesting specimen. Children, all girls, peered from behind their mothers, eyes wide with wonder and fear. The council chamber was a sphere of pure crystal that floated 100 feet above the city center. They ascended on a platform of solid light, and Jake fought down vertigo as the ground fell away beneath them. Inside, 12 beings sat in a perfect circle, each one radiating an aura of power and age. "A male," the centermost council member said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "It has been 300 cycles since one has stood in this chamber." Zara stepped forward and gave her report with military precision. The council listened in silence, their faces giving away nothing. When she finished, they turned their collective gaze on Jake. "You may speak," the elder said. Jake cleared his throat. "Honored Council, I am Commander Jake Morrison of the Earthship Pioneer's Dream. We were on a peaceful exploration mission when our vessel encountered an anomaly in your system. My ship was destroyed, and I landed here by pure chance. I mean no harm to your people or your ways. I only wish to repair my equipment and signal for rescue." "Earth," one of the council members mused. "We have heard of your world, a planet where males and females coexist." She said it like it was an unnatural thing. "May I ask," Jake ventured carefully, "why males are forbidden here?" The council exchanged glances. Finally, the elder spoke. "You know nothing of our history, alien. Nothing of the great betrayal, the gene wars, the purge that followed. Males of our species carry a genetic flaw, a predisposition to violence and domination that nearly destroyed our world." She waved her hand, and the air shimmered. Holographic images appeared. Cities in flames, beings fighting with weapons that tore reality itself, devastation on a planetary scale. "For 1,000 cycles we tried to live in harmony," she continued. "But the male aggression grew worse with each generation. They sought to dominate, to control, to own. Wars became constant. Science was perverted into weapons of ever greater destruction. Finally, when our species stood on the brink of extinction, we made a choice." The images shifted. Jake saw massive facilities, production lines of what looked like artificial wombs, celebrations in the streets. "We mastered parthenogenesis, reproduction without males. Those who remained were given a choice: exile or genetic modification to remove their aggressive traits. Most chose exile. Within a generation, Lysithea became what you see now, a world of peace, progress, and harmony." Jake absorbed this information, trying to remain diplomatic. "I understand your history, and I respect your choices, but I'm not of your species. Surely your laws—" "That remains to be seen," another council member interrupted. "You claim to be different, but you are male. The corruption may be universal." "Test me," Jake said suddenly. "Whatever tests you have, whatever proof you need that I'm not a threat. I'll submit to them all." The council murmured among themselves. Jake caught fragments of their discussion. Words like precedent and opportunity and risk. Finally, the elder raised her hand for silence. "Very well. You will undergo the trials of character. If you pass, we will discuss allowing you to repair your equipment. If you fail—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. The trials began the next day. Jake was housed in a containment facility that was more like a luxury apartment than a prison, though the energy barriers on the windows reminded him of his status. Lyra, the silver-patterned being from the forest, was assigned as his guardian. "The first trial is empathy," she explained, her tone neutral but not unkind. "We will see if you can understand and share the feelings of others without seeking to dominate or dismiss them." They brought him to a medical facility where injured beings lay in beds of living crystal. Jake was asked to assist in their care, to listen to their stories, to provide comfort without trying to take charge or minimize their experiences. It was harder than he'd expected. His military training pushed him to take command, to solve problems with action. But he forced himself to simply be present, to listen, to support without leading. One patient, barely out of childhood, had been injured in an accident at one of the city's power stations. She was terrified, in pain, missing her mother. Jake sat with her for hours, holding her hand, telling her stories of Earth, of oceans and mountains and the way snow fell in winter. He didn't try to tell her everything would be fine or that she should be brave. He simply stayed with her fear, acknowledged it, shared it. "You did well," Lyra said afterward, and Jake thought he detected a note of surprise in her voice. The second trial was cooperation. Jake was placed with a team of engineers working to repair a critical water purification system. The challenge wasn't the technology, though it was far advanced from Earth's, but working within their dynamic. These beings had collaborated for decades, their movements and thoughts synchronized like a dance. Jake had to find his place without disrupting their harmony, contributing without commanding. Took days. At first, his every suggestion was met with skepticism, his presence throwing off their rhythm. But gradually, he learned to listen more than he spoke, to offer ideas as gifts rather than directives. When the system finally hummed back to life, the team actually smiled at him, a breakthrough that felt monumental. The third trial was the hardest: restraint. They placed him in scenarios designed to provoke anger, frustration, the urge to lash out. Bureaucratic nightmares where nothing made sense and every solution was blocked. Physical challenges that pushed him to exhaustion while observers critiqued his every move. Even a staged confrontation where a group of beings accused him of crimes he hadn't committed, their words crafted to cut deep. Jake's jaw ached from clenching it. His hands balled into fists so tight his nails left marks on his palms. But he didn't lash out. He breathed through the anger, acknowledged it without letting it control him. He thought of his daughter back on Earth, how he'd taught her to count to 10 when she was upset. He counted to 1,000. Between trials, Lyra began to open up to him. She told him about their society, how they'd rebuilt after the purge, the technologies they'd developed, the art and culture that had flourished in the absence of conflict. She showed him gardens where plants sang in harmony, libraries where knowledge was stored in living crystals that could be experienced rather than simply read. "You're males?" Jake asked one evening as they watched the 3 moons rise. "What happened to those who chose exile?" Lyra's expression grew distant. They were given ships and supplies, sent to establish colonies far from here. We don't know what became of them. Perhaps they found worlds where their nature could express itself without destroying others. Perhaps they changed. Perhaps they're gone. She paused. We chose survival over unity. Not all of us are certain it was the right choice. Do you miss them? Jake asked carefully. I was born after the purge, Lyra replied. I've never known a male of my species. But sometimes. She trailed off, then shook her head. The council will convene tomorrow to decide your fate. You should rest. The council chamber felt different this time. Less hostile, more contemplative. Jake stood in the center of the circle, no longer in restraints, a sign of progress, he hoped. You have completed the trials, the elder began. Your performance was unexpected. You showed empathy without condescension, cooperation without domination, restraint without suppression. These are qualities we have not seen in males for many generations. But, another council member interjected, you are still male. The risk remains. I propose a compromise, a third member said. This one was younger than the others, with patterns of gold flowing across her skin. The alien has proven himself different from our historical experience. He poses no threat to our society. Indeed, his presence might offer us valuable perspective. Let him repair his equipment and summon his rescue, but let him also stay as our guest until they arrive. We can learn from each other. The debate that followed was intense but civil. Jake watched as these beings grappled with centuries of trauma and fear, weighing it against the evidence before them. It was democracy in its purest form. No shouting, no grandstanding, just thoughtful discussion aimed at truth. Finally, they voted. 7 in favor of the compromise, 5 against. Commander Morrison, the elder said formally, you are granted permission to repair your equipment and remain on Lysithea as our guest until your people arrive. You will have freedom of movement within designated areas and the protection of our laws. In return, you will respect our customs and share your knowledge of other worlds where the sexes coexist. Jake bowed deeply. Thank you, honored council. I'm grateful for your trust. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. With Lysithian technology at his disposal, Jake quickly repaired his communication systems and sent a message to Earth. The response came back. A rescue ship would arrive in 6 months. 6 months. At first, Jake had been dismayed by the timeline. But as days turned to weeks, he found himself dreading the rescue's arrival. He was learning so much not just about technology, but about a society that had rebuilt itself from the ashes of near extinction. He attended their schools, where education focused on emotional intelligence as much as academic knowledge. He visited their factories, where automation hadn't replaced workers, but had freed them to pursue creativity and innovation. And he formed friendships, real friendships, particularly with Lyra, who had become less guardian and more companion. She showed him secret places, underground caverns where crystal formations sang symphonies, floating gardens where gravity was negotiable, ancient ruins from before the purge that held both beauty and warning. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of violet and gold, Lyra asked him about Earth. Tell me about your females, she said. How do they survive sharing a world with males? Jake thought carefully about his answer. It hasn't always been easy, he admitted. We've had our own wars, our own struggles with dominance and inequality. But we're learning. Slowly, sometimes painfully, but we're learning that diversity makes us stronger. That different perspectives, different strengths, can complement each other rather than compete. And you? Lyra asked. How do you control the aggression? Jake smiled sadly. I don't control it. I channel it into protecting rather than dominating, into building rather than destroying. The capacity for violence exists in all humans, not just males. But so does the capacity for love, creativity, sacrifice. We're not defined by one trait but by the choices we make. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Some of us have wondered, she said finally, if we cut away too much in our fear, if in removing aggression we also removed something else. A certain drive, perhaps, a willingness to take risks, to push boundaries. Every choice has consequences, Jake agreed. But you survived. You built this incredible civilization. That matters. As his rescue drew nearer, Jake found himself documenting everything he could about Lysithian society. Not their technology, he wouldn't share that without permission, but their philosophy, their approach to governance, their innovations in education and healthcare. Earth could learn so much from them. The night before his departure, the council held a ceremony in his honor. The same chamber that had once felt like a courtroom now felt like a gathering of friends. They presented him with a crystal that held the complete history of their world. So others might understand, the elder said. Zara, the commander who had first captured him, even offered what might have been an apology. I judged you by the sins of others, she said. That was unjust. You were protecting your people, Jake replied. I respect that. As the ceremony wound down, Lyra pulled him aside. I have something for you, she said, producing a small device. It's a communicator. It will work across any distance. Should you ever wish to speak with us? With me, you need only activate it. Jake was touched beyond words. Lyra, we are not the same species, she said quickly. I know this, but friendship transcends biology, doesn't it? Yes, Jake said softly. It does. The rescue ship arrived on schedule, its bulk blotting out one of Lysithea's moons as it descended. Jake's crewmates who had survived, 8 of the 12, rushed out to embrace him, full of questions about his 6 months on an alien world. As Jake prepared to board, half the city turned out to see him off. Children who had once fled from him now waved eagerly. Engineers he'd worked with called out farewell wishes. Even some council members had come to witness his departure. "You will always be welcome here," the elder told him formally. "You have shown us that perhaps we need not fear all males, only those who choose fear over growth." Jake made his goodbyes, saving Lyra for last. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." "The galaxy is vast," she replied. "Perhaps our peoples will meet again under better circumstances." As the rescue ship lifted off, Jake pressed his face to the viewport, watching Lysithea shrink below him. He thought about the report he would write, the recommendations he would make. Not for contact, that would be Lysithea's choice, but for understanding. For growth. His hand found the communicator in his pocket, and he smiled. The universe had become a larger, more complex place during his 6 months as the only man on a world of women. He'd been tested and challenged, had his assumptions questioned and his perspectives broadened. Back on Earth, there would be debates about Lysithea's choice, about segregation versus integration, about the price of peace. But Jake had learned something important during his time there. There was no single right answer to how beings should live together. There were only choices, consequences, and the courage to keep growing despite the pain of the past. As Lysithea disappeared into the starfield, Jake activated the communicator for just a moment. "Until we meet again," he said softly. Across the vast distances of space, he knew Lyra heard him. And somewhere in that acknowledgement, in that connection between two beings who should never have met, lay the hope for all their futures. The rescue ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying Jake back to a world that would seem both familiar and strange after his experience. But he carried Lysithea with him. Its lessons, its warnings, and its promise that even the deepest divisions could be bridged by those brave enough to try. In his quarters, the history crystal pulsed with soft light, holding the story of a people who had chosen survival over tradition, peace over conflict, separation over suffering. It wasn't humanity's story, but perhaps it was a story humanity needed to hear. Jake settled in for the long journey home, already composing his words, knowing that the real challenge wasn't surviving on a world where men weren't welcome. It was convincing two civilizations that they had more to learn from each other than to fear. 3 months into the journey home, Jake found himself spending most of his time in the observation deck, staring out at the stars and clutching the communicator Lyra had given him. His fellow crew members had stopped asking about his experiences on Lysithea. His answers had become increasingly complex and philosophical, far removed from the simple adventure story they'd expected. "You've changed," Dr. Sarah Chun observed one evening, joining him at the viewport. As the ship's xenopsychologist, she'd been particularly interested in his experience. 6 months shouldn't alter someone so fundamentally. Jake turned the communicator over in his hands. "Have you ever had everything you believed about society, about human nature, challenged at once?" he asked. "They've built a functioning civilization without half their species. No wars in 300 years. No violent crime. No sexual assault. Can you imagine? But at what cost?" Sarah asked gently. "You said they exiled or altered their entire male population." "Yes," Jake admitted, "and they're still dealing with the trauma of that choice. But Sarah, when I walked their streets, I didn't have to worry about my daughter the way I do on Earth. There, she could grow up without fear, without limitations based on her gender." "Your daughter is on Earth," Sarah reminded him, "in a society with men, including you." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I know. That's what makes this so hard. I can't advocate for their solution, but I can't dismiss it either. They found a way to survive and thrive. Who are we to judge?" That night, alone in his quarters, Jake finally activated the communicator. The device hummed to life, and after a moment, Lyra's voice filled the room, clear despite the vast distance between them. "Jake, I hoped you would call." "I've been thinking," Jake said without preamble, "about your question, how do Earth females survive sharing a world with males? I gave you a diplomatic answer before. The truth is messier." "Tell me," Lyra said simply. So Jake did. He talked about crime statistics, about the constant vigilance women on Earth lived with, about his own daughter, only 12, already learning to carry her keys between her fingers, to check the back seat of her car, to never leave her drink unattended. He talked about progress and setbacks, about movements and backlash, about the exhausting work of trying to create equality in a world shaped by millennia of imbalance. And yet, he concluded, most of us still believe it's worth trying, that we can be better together than apart. Even knowing the cost? Lyra asked. Especially knowing the cost, Jake replied. Because the alternative, giving up on half our species, feels like giving up on our potential to grow. They talked for hours, the conversation ranging from philosophy to daily life. Lyra told him about new developments on Lysithea, a breakthrough in their parthenogenesis technology that might allow for more genetic diversity, debates in the council about whether to reach out to other worlds, a growing movement among younger Lysithians curious about what they'd lost along with their males. There are some, Lyra admitted, who think we've become stagnant, that in removing aggression we also removed the drive to explore, to take risks, to push boundaries. Our technology advances, but slowly. We haven't launched a new colony ship in 50 years. And what do you think? Jake asked. There was a long pause. I think, Lyra said carefully, that we made the best choice we could at the time, but choices made in crisis shouldn't bind us forever. Meeting you has made me wonder what else we might have wrong about males, or about ourselves. Their communications became regular after that. Every few days, Jake would update Lyra on their journey, and she would share news from Lysithea. Through her, he learned about the subtle changes his visit had sparked. The council had approved limited cultural exchanges with other peaceful civilizations. Schools had begun teaching about other worlds where multiple genders coexisted. There were even careful discussions about contacting the exile colonies, though those remained highly controversial. 2 weeks before reaching Earth, Jake received an urgent communication from Lyra. Her image appeared on the screen, her patterns swirling with agitation. Jake, I need to tell you something. The council has decided to send an ambassador to Earth. They want to establish formal diplomatic relations. Jake's heart leaped. That's wonderful. This could be the beginning of... I'm the ambassador, Lyra interrupted. Jake fell silent, processing this. You're coming to Earth, he said finally. A world with billions of males. Yes, Lyra said, and he could hear the fear beneath her determination. The council believes I'm the logical choice, given our friendship. But Jake, I need you to understand. I'm terrified. Everything I've been taught, every instinct I have, tells me this is dangerous. It is dangerous, Jake said honestly. Earth isn't perfect. There will be those who see you as exotic, as a conquest, as a threat. But there will also be those who see you as what you are. A bridge between our peoples. A chance for mutual understanding. Will you help me? Lyra asked. When I arrive, will you help me navigate your world? Of course, Jake promised. Just as you helped me navigate yours. The rest of the journey was spent in preparation. Jake compiled detailed guides about Earth culture, focusing on safety protocols and social norms. He reached out to colleagues in xenodiplomacy, arranging for Lyra to have official protection and support. He even contacted his ex-wife, explaining that he'd need to take their daughter out of school for a few days to meet someone important. An alien? Maria asked skeptically. You want to introduce Sophia to an alien who comes from a world without men? I want to introduce her to hope, Jake corrected. To the idea that different societies can learn from each other without losing themselves. Earth looked different to Jake as their ship entered orbit. Smaller, more fragile, more divided than he remembered. He thought about Lysithea's unified government, their sustainable cities, their 3 centuries of peace, and wondered what his home world must look like to someone raised in such harmony. The landing was chaotic. Word of Jake's experience had leaked during the journey, and the media was in a frenzy. Everyone wanted to know about the man-hating aliens and whether they posed a threat. Religious groups denounced Lysithea as an abomination. Feminist organizations were split between those who saw them as an inspiration and those who viewed their solution as extreme. Scientists simply wanted access to their technology. Jake did his best to control the narrative, emphasizing Lysithea's peaceful nature and advanced civilization. But he knew the real test would come when Lyra arrived in 3 months. Earth needed to be ready not just politically but culturally, emotionally. He moved back in with his daughter temporarily, wanting to be there as she processed everything that was happening. Sophia was brilliant, curious, and at that perfect age where anything seemed possible. "So they really don't have any boys at all?" she asked one evening over dinner. "Not for 300 years, Jake confirmed. "That's sad," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "I mean, some boys are jerks, but some are nice. Like you and Uncle David and my friend Marcus. It seems unfair to get rid of all of them just because some are bad." "It's more complicated than that," Jake began, then stopped. Was it? Or had a 12-year-old just distilled the issue to its essence? "Will I get to meet her?" Sophia asked. "The alien lady who's coming?" "If you want to," Jake said. "But Sophia, I need you to understand. She's going to be scared. Where she comes from, men and boys don't exist. She's being very brave by coming here." Sophia considered this. "I'll be extra nice to her," she decided. "Maybe I can show her that Earth isn't so scary, that we can all be friends." Jake reached across the table to squeeze his daughter's hand, thinking that perhaps the children would understand what the adults struggled with, that fear was learned, not inherent, and that friendship could bloom in the most unlikely places. 3 months later, Jake stood in the diplomatic reception area of the United Nations building, watching as a Lysithian ship descended from the sky. The vessel was a work of art, all flowing curves and shifting colors, as different from Earth's angular spacecraft as Lysithea was from Earth itself. The delegation that emerged was small, just 5 beings with Lyra at their head. She wore formal robes that shimmered with all the colors of her world's sky, but Jake could see the tension in her posture, the way her patterns swirled with barely controlled anxiety. Their eyes met across the landing pad, and Jake smiled encouragingly. Lyra straightened, drawing on some inner reserve of courage, and stepped forward to address the assembled dignitaries. "People of Earth," she began, her translator rendering her musical voice into multiple languages simultaneously. "I come from a world that chose isolation over integration, separation over suffering. We stand before you now not to judge or be judged, but to learn, to see if different paths can lead to mutual understanding." The crowds were mixed, some welcoming, some hostile, most simply curious. Jake saw protesters with signs reading, "Earth doesn't need alien feminism," and others with "Lysithea shows the way." He saw fear and hope, anger and wonder, all the complex emotions that came with change. After the formal ceremonies, Jake was finally able to approach Lyra privately. Up close, he could see how the stress was affecting her. Her patterns were muted, her movements careful and controlled. "How are you really?" he asked softly. "Terrified," she admitted. "There are so many of them, males, everywhere I look. And they're so loud, aggressive. They stand too close, speak too forcefully." She paused. "But also, some have been kind, respectful, different from what I expected." "It's a lot," Jake acknowledged. "Take it one day at a time. You don't have to change your entire worldview overnight." "Don't I?" Lyra asked with a weak smile. "Isn't that exactly what I'm here to do?" The next weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, conferences, and cultural exchanges. Lyra met with world leaders, scientists, educators, and activists. She toured cities and villages, universities, and factories. Jake stayed by her side as much as possible, serving as both protector and cultural translator. There were difficult moments. A group of men who catcalled Lyra on the street, not understanding that to her, their compliments felt like threats. A heated debate with religious leaders who saw Lysithea's single-gender society as an affront to their beliefs. A near-panic attack in a crowded subway station when the press of bodies became too much. But there were beautiful moments too. A visit to a women's shelter where Lyra saw Earth females supporting each other through trauma. A dinner with Jake's family where Sophia peppered her with questions and treated her like any other interesting adult. A conversation with male feminists working to dismantle the very systems Lysithea had fled from. The turning point came during a visit to a school where boys and girls learned together. Lyra watched, fascinated. as children of all genders collaborated on a science project, their excitement and curiosity transcending any artificial divisions. "They're just children," she murmured to Jake, "before they learn to be afraid of each other. Before we teach them to be afraid," Jake corrected gently. That night, in her secured hotel room, Lyra called home to make her first formal report. Jake gave her privacy but could hear the emotion in her voice as she spoke to the council. When she emerged, her patterns were swirling with something Jake had never seen before. Uncertainty mixed with possibility. "What did they say?" he asked. "They're divided," Lyra admitted. "Some think I'm being corrupted, that exposure to males is affecting my judgment. Others are intrigued by what I've shared. A few have even suggested." She trailed off. "What?" "Reopening dialogue with the exile colonies. To see what became of our males. To learn if they found a different way." Jake felt a surge of hope. "That would be extraordinary." "Or catastrophic," Lyra countered. "Jake, what if we were right? What if males of our species truly are irredeemably violent? What if contact destroys the peace we've built?" "Then you'll handle it," Jake said firmly. "The same way you've handled everything else, with wisdom, caution, and hope. The difference is, now you won't be acting from a place of ignorance or fear. You'll be making an informed choice." Lyra's mission was extended by 6 months, then a year. She traveled across Earth, meeting with diverse cultures and communities. She saw the best and worst of humanity, war and peace, cruelty and kindness, all mixed together in the messy tapestry of a world that hadn't given up on integration despite its challenges. Jake accompanied her when he could, their friendship deepening into something neither had words for. Not romance, the biological differences were too vast, but a connection that transcended species and gender. They were proof that understanding was possible, that fear could be overcome with patience and courage. The day finally came when Lyra had to return to Lysithea. The farewell ceremony was more subdued than her arrival. The novelty had worn off, replaced by a more mature appreciation for what her visit represented. Promises were made for continued dialogue, for student exchanges, for careful steps toward a larger relationship between their worlds. At the spaceport, Jake and Lyra stood apart from the crowds for a final conversation. "I have something for you," Jake said, pulling out a small device. "It's a collection of messages from Earth children to the children of Lysithea. Drawings, songs, questions. Sophia organized it. She wanted them to know that Earth children would like to be friends." Lyra's patterns swirled with emotion as she accepted the device. "And I have something for you." She produced a crystal different from the historical record he'd been given before. "This contains proposals from progressive council members for gradual reintegration, pilot programs for mixed-gender colonies on neutral worlds, therapeutic protocols for addressing generational trauma. It's not a promise, but it's a beginning. Change takes time," Jake agreed. "But it starts with people like us. Like you." "I used to think courage meant not being afraid," Lyra said. "Now I know it means being terrified and trying anyway." She paused. "I've been authorized to tell you something. The council has voted to send a larger delegation next time, including some who remember the time before the purge. And they've sent a message to one of the exile colonies. We're waiting for a response." Jake felt tears prick his eyes. "Lyra, that's terrifying," she finished. "And necessary. You showed me that, Jake, that sometimes the scariest path is the one that leads to growth." As her ship lifted off, Jake didn't feel the sadness he'd expected. Instead, he felt the weight and promise of the future. Two civilizations shaped by different traumas and choices, fumbling toward understanding. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, misunderstandings, perhaps even failures. But as he watched Lyra's ship disappear into the stars, Jake thought about his daughter, about the Earth she would inherit. A world where contact with civilizations like Lysithea could teach them new ways of organizing society, of addressing inequality, of imagining gender relations. And perhaps Earth could offer something in return, proof that integration, however flawed and difficult, was possible. The communicator in his pocket hummed. Already, Lyra was reaching out across the void. Jake smiled and answered, ready to continue a conversation that might just change two worlds. In the end, Jake realized, being lost on a planet where men weren't welcome had helped him find something precious. Perspective on his own world, and hope for all their futures. The universe was vast and full of different solutions to the problem of how beings could live together. And in that diversity, in that willingness to learn from each other despite fear and history, lay the seed of something better than any of them could achieve alone. The story of Jake and Lyra, of Earth and Lysithea, was just beginning. But it was a beginning built on courage, understanding, and the radical belief that even the deepest divisions could be bridged by those willing to see beyond their fear to the possibility of connection. And somewhere in the space between worlds, two friends continued their conversation, building tomorrow one word at a time.